Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, as always, is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm getting excited about WWDC. We've talked about this a little bit before. I mean, it's coming up. It's going to be a bummer that we won't be there in person to see each other and to see our mutual friends, but it's still an exciting time of year. It's a time when Apple announces a lot of interesting things, and I expect we'll get some interesting announcements this year. And it's the kind of time of year, too, where you start thinking about what do you really want out of the Mac or the iPad or the iPhone or the Apple TV or whatever it is, in the coming year. What do we hope? What do we wish Apple will release this year? And I know you turn that into a topic for App Stories. And we're going to do more than one of these, but we're going to talk about some of our wishes.
Yeah, we do talk about our wishes for WWDC every year. Of course, this time is different because for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously, we will not be in town for WWDC because it'll be an online-only event. Secondly, also, this year, we know that there's iPadOS as a separate platform, whereas in previous years, we would only talk about iOS. And so I thought, why don't we start by sharing some of our wishes, not predictions, but just things we would like to see and to have in the next version of iPadOS. Let's start with iPad, and then we can move on to iOS and then the other platforms such as macOS, watchOS, and maybe even tvOS. Maybe we do have... Actually, I do have some tvOS wishes, but we'll talk about that at some point in the future. So why don't we start with iPadOS, and why don't we start by hearing from you, John? What's something you would like to see on the iPad?
So I really would like to see audio source control. I know this is
all right. So you're going for the big one immediately.
I'm going for the big one. I'm going for the podcaster one too. It's one that I know you've talked about, and a bunch of our mutual podcaster friends have talked about in the past. But the problem is right now, it's not that easy to have an iPad set up for both listening, getting audio input from something like Skype at the same time that you record your end of the conversation locally. And if we had that kind of control, then, we would have the possibility of an app like Audio Hijack, which we both use on the Mac and is a fantastic app from Rogue Amoeba. But Rogue Amoeba couldn't make that app if they wanted to on the iPad right now because the underpinnings and the mechanics for doing that in the APIs just isn't there. And while there are solutions, and I know, you obviously have written about what you're doing, and Jason Snell does something that's very similar that inspired you to do your setup. That is it's a very expensive solution for that problem and requires a lot of extra hardware. Whereas I think that there's a solution that could be implemented here at the OS level and do it all on these powerful iPads that we have.
Yeah, this is one of the features that would seriously cut down the amount of time I spend on my Mac every week. Because if I could record on iPad without having to involve the kind of setup that I have, that would be fantastic for me. And really, you don't have to, I don't think you have to be a podcaster to wish for a better audio input and output system on iPadOS. Because even basic things like, what if I want to be able to watch a video on mute and listen to music at the same time? That's not possible on iPad. You cannot do that. A lot of it's not uncommon for me, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that I want to do things like keeping a Twitch video, for example, on mute so that I can only see the video in the background, maybe with picture-in-picture or something like that, and listen to music or listen to a podcast at the same time. This is not possible on iPad because only one audio track can exist at a time. And on the Mac, it's completely different, where you have full control over, first of all, which app can play sound and on which devices, but also you can have concurrent sessions for audio and video at the same time. And I guess that kind of freedom, yes, it would be beneficial to podcasters and to all kinds of audio creators on the platform. But also, if you're a consumer, I bet you've run across, you ran into these situations before. And I really think it's time for iPad to grow up in that department of, let me have better control over how many audio sessions and video sessions I want to have going at the same time, because I think it's kind of silly that a decade into the iPad, you can only have one audio track going or one video going at a time. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
absolutely agree. And also, it would open, as you mentioned, it would open a new category of apps, a new category of utilities that could be able to, could exist on iOS and on iPadOS. Because arguably, I mean, let's face it, this should also be a feature on the iPhone, but it would be extremely beneficial on the iPad because it would allow for an entirely new category of productivity apps and audio utilities. You mentioned Audio Hijack, Sound Source, also by Rug Amoeba, is another one. I completely agree. Better audio source control will be fantastic on iPad.
I'll tell you what, Federico, too. I think that we would then have the ability to have real Logic on the iPad. Right now, we just got an update to Logic Pro 10 from Apple, but on the iPad, it's still a companion app. It's still called Logic Remote, and it gives you controls that are on your iPad that you can use when you're editing music and that sort of thing. But, because it doesn't have multiple audio sources, at the moment, it could never be even close to what Logic itself can do on the Mac.
Yeah. Okay, so my first wish is actually a collection of wishes, because I want to talk about the big picture of iPad multitasking.
Okay.
So I've mentioned many times before how the current multitasking system works for me personally, because I've learned how to use it. I know how to operate split view and drag and drop and the dock and dragging icons to create spaces. That said, I do not think it's perfect, and I think it could use a lot of clarification and a lot more flexibility, both for new users and for existing power users on the platform. So I also want to say that I do not wish for iPad multitasking to become more like the Mac. Like, I do not want resizable windows. I do not want to have, like the stoplight controls for
Right.
Windows like they exist on the Mac. No, I do not want that. I want a lot of refinements to the current system. And I also think that unfortunately we will not get all of these changes this year, because I don't know why. I know nothing personally, but it does feel like it's a little too early to have a major revamp of iPad multitasking. So with this in mind, I have a collection of enhancements and maybe smaller improvements that I think together could do a lot to improve the current system without necessarily changing it altogether, without necessarily having to redo the whole thing again. So the first one is something that I've been mentioning in my iOS and iPadOS reviews since the days of iOS 11. I want to be able to create favorite workspaces. So by workspace, I mean a space, which would be the official terminology, and a space in iPadOS, unlike the Mac, it's not a separate desktop. A space is intended as any combination of apps in split view. So if you have Safari and Notes together in split view, that's a space. I want to be able to create these favorite combinations of apps, these favorite spaces, so that I can easily relaunch them and recreate them. Because I don't know about you, John, but I constantly find myself in this scenario where it's Friday morning, for example, and on Friday morning I have a specific task that involves using IA Writer and the App Store together in split view, because I want to browse the App Store for new apps, and I want to write about them for Mac Stories Weekly in IA Writer, which is my text editor. And every single time I have to recreate this space, and I have to recreate this space by navigating to a specific folder in IA Writer and opening the App Store. And I think it would just be terrific if I could either bookmark this space and mark it as a favorite, or create a rule or something in the multitasking settings that says, create this space by opening this folder in IA Writer and opening the App Store on the other side of the screen. So a way for me to say, this combination of apps is something that I do all the time. Give me a shortcut, give me a button that I can pin somewhere in the app switcher, so that when I press it, it opens or recreates, if it doesn't exist anymore, this combination of apps, this space. I feel like the ability to do this would save me a lot of time that I otherwise just spend dragging windows around and rearranging apps for something, and I have multiple such combinations, right? Google Docs and Safari, two Twitter apps that I use, one to browse my timeline, one to browse my mentions. I find myself constantly having these fixed combinations of apps that, due to the nature of iPad multitasking, they are easily destroyed. So a way to get them back, to recreate them, would be very beneficial to me.
Yeah, I think your example of what you do on Friday mornings is a particularly good one too, because it's something you do regularly, but you don't do it every single day. So that
Right.
by the time Friday rolls around again, the likelihood is that that combination has either already been destroyed or it's so far down the line that it's easier just to recreate it than to go, swiping through to try to find where you last used it.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, maybe this could be shortcut actions, maybe it could be like an actual UI element in the app switcher, but just let me create favorite spaces or let me mark them as favorite and then later let me reopen them. Also in the app switcher, and I think this is very surprising that it's not a feature yet, let me search for open apps and windows by name in the switcher. It really slows me down that the only way to find a specific window for an app on my iPad is to show the expose view.
Right.
The app switcher is a very convenient way to get a bird's eye view of all your open apps and windows. However, the app switcher cannot be filtered by name or by title of the window or by content, whatever. There's no search bar, and I would like to have a search bar in there so that I could filter my apps and windows and easily find them again. I think it's kind of silly that the only way to browse the app switcher is by dragging this long carousel of tiles without the ability to search them. Speaking of which, in the app switcher, you have these tiles, right? You have these cards.
Right.
And they are sort of almost inviting to the touch, right? You have these cards, and usually when you have these elements on the iPad, usually you would like to manipulate them. And I think it's kind of incredible. I actually mentioned this again in my iOS 11 review. You cannot combine apps in a split view from the app switcher. And I would really love to be able to manage my spaces, not just by closing them, but by combining them and, if you will, destroying them in the app switcher. So I would like to have maybe a context menu, or maybe just use drag and drop to take two windows in the app switcher and bring them together to create a split view. And maybe there could be a context menu that says, unpair these two apps and turn them back into full screen windows. Because again, right now the app switcher you can only use to preview the open windows that you have, and that's it. You have no search bar, and you have no way to actually manage those windows. I would really love to be able to combine them in split view and unpair in existing split views.
Yeah, I could even see doing an unpairing using like a pinch gesture, where you spread your fingers apart, that kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot of it reminds me a lot of when you create folders on the home screen. I mean, why shouldn't you be able to take one app and drag it on top of another to create the pair? Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Yeah, it would make total sense, I think, but it's not there yet. You mentioned this. I think you had this in your notes. And it's also something that really annoys me. The fact that if you're using your iPad with a keyboard, you can use Command Space to invoke search, which would be the equivalent of Spotlight on the Mac. And search on iPad with a keyboard is the best way to, or I was about to say only way. It's not the only way, but it's the best way for sure to add a different app to a space, to a split view, or maybe to slide over, without having to use the dock. So if you wanna bring in an app that is not currently in the dock, that is not currently in split view, with search you can just search for an app name and tap and hold on the icon and drag the icon whatever you want on screen. The problem is that this modal interaction of invoking search on top of your space and then dismissing search is only possible if you have an external keyboard. If you're using your iPad with touch, there's no way to invoke search on top of whatever you're doing on screen at the moment. And I really think there should be a way to whether show the home screen or bring up search if you don't have an external keyboard connected to the iPad. Because right now, if you're using just the iPad in tablet mode and you want to bring in an app that is not in your dock, you're basically forced to go back to the home screen. And from there, it's not a good interaction to bring apps from the home screen to multitasking. So there should be a way for that is as convenient as search, but for those scenarios when you don't have an external keyboard.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that's really ironic about this to me is that this has become more of a problem for me now that I have the Magic Keyboard, because the Magic Keyboard kind of encourages you to pull the iPad off the keyboard and use it as a tablet. And I've been using it more and more that way throughout the day. And I've found, so I've run up against this frustration more often than I used to when I always had, even if I was using, before, if I had the Smart Keyboard Folio, I may have been using my iPad in tablet mode with the keyboard folded to the back side of it. But if I had to create a quick split view, sometimes it's just easier to fold it back and put it in keyboard mode and quickly create the split view that way. But with the Magic Keyboard, that's not possible if you've pulled it off and you're just using it kind of naked.
Yeah. Also, I want to talk about Expose. This is the new feature that Apple launched in iPadOS 13. It's a way for you to see all open windows for an app on your iPad. And you can do this by long pressing. So there's a couple of ways to do this. It gets kind of confusing. You can either long press an icon, either in your dock or the home screen, and from the context menu that you get, you can tap on Show All Windows, and that'll show you the Expose view with a preview. It's like an app switcher, but for that specific application. So it shows you all open windows, whether they are full screen, split view, or slide over windows for that specific app. However, if you're using, say, let's say you're using Notes, right? So you have Notes open in full screen, and Notes is also in your dock. You don't have to long press the Notes icon. You can invoke the dock and press the Notes icon once. Just tap it once, and it'll default to Expose, because Notes is also your frontmost current application. So besides this, these differences, I really think there should just be an easier way to open Expose. I think it could be faster, especially for when an app is not the app you're currently using. I feel the interaction of showing the context menu and then showing all windows to be kind of clunky. And I would like to see, I don't know how, but I feel like it's easier on the Mac. Maybe there could be a keyboard modifier if you're using an external keyboard, that if you hold down a combination of keys and you tap an icon, it defaults to Expose. I just feel like the interaction is a little clunky right now, and it's not explained well. I think there should be a faster way to open Expose. And speaking of Expose, I would also like to see a fix for... This is getting kind of technical, and I'm sorry, but I need to mention, and I need to mention this because I run into it all the time. I think other iPad users will understand. So when you open Expose, you see all open windows. However, Expose doesn't tell you whether one of those windows for that specific application is already participating in another space, in another split view. So what happens is that you open Expose and you see, for example, 2 Notes windows opening slide over and 3 Notes windows opening full screen. The problem is that Expose doesn't tell you whether one of those 3 full screen windows are actually open in another space. It doesn't tell you, hey, look, this Notes window is actually open in a split view that also contains Safari. And maybe that's a workspace that you want to go back to. So if you accidentally close that window, you also lose the space. And this plays into this sense of impermanence that a lot of people have. And I sometimes also feel about spaces in iPadOS. And really goes back to this idea of sometimes I want to have these fixed sort of favorite spaces. And I never want to accidentally destroy them. I never want to accidentally impair those apps. But the combination of lacking a favorite space feature, and expose not telling me whether one of these windows is also participating in a split view leads to me accidentally unpairing windows from a split view all the time because I don't have the context to tell, oh yeah, this window is paired with Safari or Twitter or something else. So I want a system that makes sure that my spaces are never accidentally destroyed in the background. And expose could use the additional context that tells me, look, one of these windows is already paired with something else. And right now it doesn't.
Since we're talking about multitasking, I do want to add one more to the heap, which relates to slide over. And I guess it's two aspects of slide over. One is I always wish I could slide the app off to the left as well. A lot of times.
You mean dismiss a slide over to the left?
Yes, dismiss a slide over.
Because you can slide it to the left, but you cannot.
Yes, that is.
Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You can slide it over to the left. And I do that a lot because it's covering content that I need to see on the right-hand side. So, but then you have to kind of slide it all the way over and then dismiss it off the edge. And one of the things that happens to me far too frequently when I'm doing that, moving it all the way from the left over to the right, is that I'll accidentally put it in split view. And I just feel like maybe it's just my fat fingers and maybe a lot of people don't have this problem, but I find that I do that far too often now, and then it's all of a sudden now I'm rebuilding my split view, the way I wanted it, and so I feel like it's a little too finicky, and I just like the ability to quickly dismiss it off to the left instead of just to the right.
Yeah, I agree. So these are my my suggestions for my wishes for multitasking enhancements on iPadOS. Again. Maybe Apple is actually considering a complete revamp of the entire system, and these suggestions, these wishes will no longer apply. But I would be really surprised to see an entirely new system this year. So I guess we'll see how it goes.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing your enterprise's infrastructure, Linode has the pricing, support, and scale you need to take your project to the next level. They have 11 data centers spread throughout the world, including their latest one in Sydney, Australia. And with their enterprise-grade hardware, S3-compatible storage option, and next-generation network, Linode delivers the performance you expect at a surprisingly good price. Get started with Linode today with a $20 credit for listeners of this show, and you'll get access to native SSD storage, a 40-gigabit network, and industry-leading processors, a revamped cloud manager built on an open-source single-pane app, root access to your server, along with API version 4 and Python CLI, Nanode plans starting as low as $5, and a whole lot more. Go to linode.com/appstories and use the promo code AppStories2020 when creating a new Linode account, and you'll get $20 towards your next project. Oh, and you know what? Linode is hiring too. So go check out linode.com/careers to find out more if that interests you. Once again, the URL to get that $20 credit is linode.com/appstories and the promo code AppStories2020. Our thanks to Linode for their support of the show.
John, what's up next in your iPad OS wish list?
Well, this wish is very much a Federico wish too, I know, because I wish for better external display support. Because right now, as we sit here recording this, I'm running off my Mac Mini, and I have my entire LG 4K display at my disposal for all my windows, and I can see everything right in front of me. When I'm running on my iPad, more often than not, I've got pillar boxed view where it's, just a recreation mirrored screen of the iPad. And that's no good. I mean, it's a waste of space. What I don't want to get rid of mirroring. Mirroring has a place on the iPad. But since we now have all these different size classes and a lot of independence for apps to be able to run at different sizes, it's time for them to be able to also run on the aspect ratios that are available on an external display. And I know that's probably not as simple as it sounds. However, it's really frustrating and feels kind of cobbled together when you're working with a mirrored iPad display on an external monitor, to the point where I just don't do it very often. Now, there are apps that support external views using, I guess it's SceneKit, whether it's MindNote or Working Copy. And I know that there are others, especially there are some games that do this too, because that's really where the feature came from initially. But there are just not very many of them. And so the number of times that I'm working in those two apps, it's nice, but I'd love to have it, for instance, for iWriter and really just about anything. I mean, Safari would be a much better experience if it were full screen. It's just one of those things where I not only do I want the full screen used, but I want options to be able to use the iPad and the external display differently if I want, or to mirror them. I want it to have kind of flexibility in the approach for using an external display.
Yeah. Now that they have a system pointer, it feels like it should be doable.
Right.
And also they have this, as you mentioned, this new Scene API that is what multi-window uses on iPadOS. And by having different scenes, in theory, developers could have separate controls for showing a scene, so a window on the iPad's display, and a different scene with different controls and a different UI scale on an external display. And then you would use the pointer to navigate, to move between the iPad and the external display. And I think Apple is listening here. I think Apple is very much aware of the fact that iPad users, at least a good portion of them, are using the iPad Pro with an external display, especially because of USB-C making that even easier. So I want to be optimistic and say that this is going to happen sooner rather than later. I wouldn't have said this hadn't the Magic Keyboard come out in the spring. So I think the timeline for proper external display support in iPadOS has accelerated, because we now have a pointer and we now have an actual Apple accessory with a trackpad. And a trackpad is ideal for controlling something on a screen that you cannot touch, such as an external display. So I agree, and I want to be optimistic in this regard. I want to mention Search. So it used to be called Spotlight, but now the official name is Search with a capital S.
Okay.
A lot of people still call it Spotlight, but if you read through the official Apple documentation, it's called Search with a capital S. So Search on iPad, to me at least, it feels slow compared to Spotlight on the Mac. Spotlight on the Mac, it just feels snappier. It just feels like it lets me get work done more quickly. It gives me results more quickly. And I think it's a combination of two factors. One is I dislike how, by default, Search on iPad, so when you press Command Space and open Search and you start typing, the upper section of Search is Search Suggestions. And I really dislike having those, 5 lines of text always in there. Like, let me just type whatever I want. Don't give me suggestions. I don't want your typing suggestions because I know what I'm searching for. So that I dislike. And also, I feel like Spotlight on the Mac, it opens modally on, it doesn't take over whatever I'm doing in full screen. So that also helps in making it feel nimble and just less intrusive. And also, when I start typing in Spotlight on the Mac, if I'm typing the name of an application on my computer, it instantly highlights and auto-completes within the search box itself the name of the app, and then I can just press enter to launch it. Whereas on iPadOS and iOS, the interaction is very different. It doesn't instantly highlight the app, and it doesn't. So this is the second aspect. Search on the iPad does not have a second panel on the right side of the screen that previews the content I'm searching for. Right. And I really think Search on iPad could learn from Spotlight on the Mac in terms of, first of all, not taking over the entire screen. I really prefer the modal interaction on macOS, and also the ability to preview documents or the locations of apps or something else on your computer, a folder, a file, an email message, a contact. To have that split screen view in Spotlight, so you have search results on the left and a preview panel on the right, I really think that could also work on iPad. Because most of the, we also have quick look previews on iPad. It's the same preview framework. And I really think it could speed things up in terms of let me search for a document. I see that this is the document I'm looking for because there's a preview. So let me just press enter to launch it. Basically, I think Search on iPad could learn a few tricks from Spotlight on the Mac.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I guess I would throw in too that these Siri suggestions need to be rethought, I think. I don't know about you, but when I open search, it's pretty unusual that I pick one of those apps that automatically appear below the search box. And on top of that, I do get Siri suggestions for shortcuts, for example. But like I just looked at it right now, and the one that it's suggesting is run app debuts, which is something we use for Club Mac Stories. But the problem with app debuts is it takes a URL from the App Store. It's not a shortcut that is of any use run from search. It wouldn't do anything unless there's something on the clipboard, a URL on the clipboard already. So that's just one of those things. That's more of a general complaint about search and Siri that would apply to the iPhone too. But I find that sort of thing frustrating. And I guess I would add too that on the iPad mini is that when you pull down, and if you're not using a keyboard and you do the software keyboard actually covers up the app results when you do a search. And it's frustrating. There's a little sliver of the icon that shows above the top of the software keyboard that you can tap. But if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, it can be a little hard to. Unless you dismiss the software keyboard, you're not going to see exactly what you're trying to find.
Speaking of keyboard, I want to mention the keyboard and trackpad because I think it's pretty awesome that we now have a pointer. That said, I think there's more work to be done in terms of keyboard control and pointer integration in iPadOS. So first up, kind of an obvious one. Let me assign personalized system-wide keyboard shortcuts to anything I want. Just like on the Mac, where there's plenty of utilities to do this, you can even do so in settings. System preferences, it's the name on the Mac. I want to be able to have a menu in settings where I can assign a custom keyboard shortcut to anything I want. So it could be running a shortcut in the Shortcuts app, or it could be launching a specific app, or launching a favorite space in multitasking. It could just be anything. Let me assign a keyboard shortcut to anything I want. So system-wide keyboard shortcuts for stuff, I guess, would be my wish. Also, we now have the Magic Keyboard, we now have the pointer, and the pointer supports all kinds of interactions on iPadOS. There's no UI element that cannot be interacted with using the pointer. However, what I would like to have is keyboard shortcuts, so keyboard control for multitasking actions. I think it's slightly inconvenient, to say the least, that if I want to combine two apps in split view, I need to do so with drag and drop. Or if I have a split view, the only way to unpair those apps is to tap and hold the divider in the middle of the screen and manually drag one of the apps to the side. Just give me keyboard shortcuts to manage split views, to unpair and repair and manage and invoke slide over, hide slide over, do things in multitasking with the keyboard, with keyboard shortcuts. Also, one of the things that I've always wanted to see, I'm pretty sure that CGP Grey came up with this idea years ago on an episode of Cortex, but I can open search with command space and I can highlight apps in search results with the keyboard. I can open apps with the keyboard by pressing enter, but let me add one of those app results to my current space with keyboard shortcuts. So imagine searching for an app in search and then doing something like command right to add it to the right side of split view, or command left to add it to the left side, or command app to add in slide over. So keyboard shortcuts within search to add an app result to your current space, either in full screen or slide over or split view. Also, I think it's kind of confusing how you need to open Control Center and slide over with the pointer right now, that you need to sort of bash the pointer onto one side of the screen if you want to reveal slide over and Control Center. I think it could be easier. I think the gesture could be different. Right now, I basically find myself slamming the pointer twice into the right edge of the display when I want to open slide over. And I think maybe it's a combination of like the force required to place the pointer on that edge of the display, but I think it could be different, and I think it could be easier. And also, This is a long wish list.
It is a long list.
I know I have a lot of thoughts. I would like to have hot corners like on the Mac. I know that the iPad accessibility stuff currently does support a version of hot corners. So that would
Right.
be the feature on the Mac that lets you perform an action whenever you slide the cursor onto one of the corners of the screen. But the accessibility version, it reminds me of the accessibility cursor from last year. It's not like the real thing, and it's not as well integrated as a native option could actually be. So hot corners to quickly perform actions whenever I place the pointer on in one corner of the screen. And lastly, I think right now all the trackpad options and pointer options are all over the place in the settings app on iPad. I think Apple could use a single dedicated page that combines all pointer and trackpad settings and trackpad options and makes it easy for users to define and customize gestures and behaviors.
Yeah, the settings app is a whole can of worms because I think it's gotten a little bit out of hand over time, and I find myself having a hard time finding things in it as well. I want to mention something that I don't think you and I have ever talked about, which is low power mode on the iPad. I want this. I mean, I have it on my phone. Why don't I have it on my iPad? I mean, I'm using this, iPad Pro sitting next to my Mac throughout the day because I'm moving. I use handoff and I use AirDrop all the time to move images and URLs and all sorts of things between the two devices because a lot of the workflows we have built up for Mac Stories are shortcuts based. And so even if I'm working on my Mac, I usually just AirDrop things over. Like I'll take a link and I'll AirDrop it over to my iPad, and then I'll use the shortcut to add it to our Trello board for the club, that sort of thing. And as a result, the iPad is getting used intermittently throughout the day. And I find that it, with the screen unattached to a cover where it's off most of the time, notifications and just my intermittent use really drains the battery during the day. And I'd like to be able to have a low power mode that only really activates its radios and things when I'm using it, maybe once an hour or whatever it happens to be.
All right, so the home screen. I talked about this in a recent episode of Connected, but I need to talk about this again here for the sake of talking about all the wishes that I have regarding iPadOS.
Alrighty.
I think it's time for a makeover of the iPadOS home screen. I think it's nice that Apple gave us the option to pin widgets on the home screen last year. However, I think it's time to go beyond that even and allow users to freely place icons and widgets anywhere on screen. So I want Apple to go beyond the rigid grid layout that's been with us since the iPad's inception and the iPhone's inception for well over a decade at this point. And I think it's time that we get the option to freely customize the layout of our home screens by placing icons and widgets anywhere. And in doing this, I would like to see Apple launch a new widget framework for developers that allows them to create fully interactive, rich widgets that support input, that support custom animations, that support custom effects, and rich graphics as well. So I'm thinking of things like music widgets, for example. Wouldn't it be awesome to have a music widget on the home screen that shows you what is playing with, album artwork and music controls? Wouldn't it be awesome to have, widgets that give you full weather forecasts with interactions so that you can switch between multiple days of the week? So a new widget framework that gives developers the freedom to create rich custom experiences without having to launch an application on your iPad, but also that gives users the freedom to rearrange and customize their home screens however they want. In addition to this, I think what could also be nice would be the option to have, so how we have custom icons? And I think that surprised a lot of us when Apple announced support for custom app icons a couple of years ago. I think the next step would be to support live icons. So icons that can dynamically change to show you some additional information. One obvious example, allow third-party calendar apps to show you the date on their icon. Because right now, this feature is exclusive to the Apple Calendar app. Or, for example, the clock icon, also from Apple, can show you like the time because it's a live icon, but third-party apps cannot do that. So live icons for third-party developers, and then it's up to developers to support them. Maybe some of them will go slightly overboard with their custom animations, and others will have a more nuanced approach to them. But I think developers should be able to choose, and users should be able to choose if they want to use live icons. On the home screen, I would also love to see files and folders. So let me, just like on the Mac, let me bookmark files that I open all the time or folders that I open all the time, and let me put them on the home screen as shortcuts. Do not force me to open the Files app and navigate to those folders or those files every single time. Let me bookmark them and add them as icons to or widgets to the home screen. Right now, I'm doing this with a custom shortcut that I put together called FS Bookmarks. It shouldn't be necessary for people to use a shortcut that involves JavaScript to create a home screen
right.
bookmark for a file or a folder. This should be a system feature. And lastly, I would really love to see the ability to run shortcuts entirely on the home screen. So I mean custom shortcuts from the Shortcuts app. Right now, you can add your shortcuts to the home screen as icons, but when you tap those icons, they launch the Shortcuts app. Whereas, at the very least, I would like to see a shortcut fully execute on the home screen without launching the Shortcuts app. So imagine like an icon for a shortcut that when you tap it, instead of opening shortcuts, the icon has a progress bar and it shows you the execution of the shortcut in line on the home screen without leaving the home screen. But I could go a step beyond that and imagine widgets for shortcuts. You know, we're talking about a widget framework. Imagine if a shortcut could run, not like right now we have the shortcuts widget, but the shortcuts widget is a collection of widgets. But imagine if any individual shortcut could become its own widget and support custom graphics and interactions. So choosing from lists or entering some text or picking a photo right on the home screen. That would be, I think it would be incredible, and it would increase my usage of shortcuts even more.
Yeah, that would be really nice. You know, looking at the home screen, I wonder, you know, one thing I think about when I think about widgets and live widgets on the home screen is the Apple Watch, right? And complications, which come in various sizes and styles. And I wonder if Apple could, you know, do something somewhat related and similar to that, where, you know, preserving the grid, if that's ultimately what they decide to do, but allowing for the widgets to take over a certain grid of what would otherwise be icons, whether that's just a one icon space that would be small and just show you the time or the weather, like you said, or a 4x4 or a 2x3, whatever it happens to be. I wonder if that's one way to kind of fit it in within this design of icons on the home screen. And the only reason I mention that is not because I'm necessarily wedded to that design myself, but I do feel like that's a familiarity with the system that Apple has been very resistant. I mean, going all the way back to the original iPhone, to touch and change. Mm-hmm. And while it, you know, there's definitely an argument to be made that it's time to maybe change that, there are ways I think that this could be fit in, just like we have the widget sidebar on the iPad Pro now, that could be done this way too. So,
yeah. I'm almost done with my list. Just a couple more things. In Files, so we're going to talk about Files more in depth when we share our iOS wish list. But there's one iPad-specific feature of Files that I want to talk about, Column View. So Column View is a feature of iPadOS 13 that, first of all, it's got a bit of a problem in that a lot of people don't know that it exists because showing column view is kind of hidden in that there's a keyboard shortcut, but if you don't know the keyboard shortcut, then it might as well not exist. And also to show column view, you need to swipe down in Files to reveal a toolbar that has view options. And one of those view options is column view. And column view is awesome. It's my default view for Files. So I think it should be, the UI of the Files app should make it more clear that view options exist, because I think it really does take advantage, especially of the big iPad Pro. It takes advantage of the big display to show you multiple, a column structure to navigate nested folders and subfolders. It's really well done. in column view, in the inspector, so when you reach a file in column view, the last column that you see is the file inspector, like on the Mac. And I think it would be awesome to have quick actions for files in the inspector, not made by Apple. So right now, there are some quick actions for files. Things like if you select a video, you have quick actions to trim the video. Or if you select a photo, you can crop the photo. But these actions are made by Apple, and you cannot customize them. And I would like quick actions to become a new extension type for third-party developers to create. Again, just like on the Mac, where third-party developers can create quick actions, I would like to have the same feature, because it's really the same feature and the same application. In the Finder, you have the inspector, and you have quick actions for files made by third-party developers. And it should be the same on iPad, where you also have a file inspector that already has support for quick actions, but only those made by Apple. And I could go, again, a step beyond that and say there should be a new extension type for developers to create quick actions, but also you should be able to pin shortcuts that you
that was
going
to be my suggestion if you didn't say it. I mean, that's a great one. You know, I want to close out my list of things, Federico, before you. I know you might have another one or two, but I do want to mention a clipboard manager and shelf app. I know you guys talked about this. You guys talked about this a little bit on Connected last week, but you know, I feel like clipboard managers and a shelf app have dropped off the discussion a little bit, only because we have multitasking and multi-windowing now. But I feel like it's just as relevant today as it ever has been. It certainly was something that made a lot of sense when we were using full screen single apps one at a time. But there are times where it's just easier to take a snippet of something. And I do this on my Mac all the time, a snippet of something, whether it's an image or a URL or some text or whatever it is, and just park it somewhere temporarily without having to go to an app and, you know, do the whole dance between various apps. And I think there's still room for that to work in the new system that we have, and also to complement it really well, because I think it would make some of those interactions just a lot simpler.
Yeah, you know my thoughts and feelings on
I know, going all the way back to iOS 10, right?
Yeah, that's correct. My final wish is just a general thought. I think it's time for Apple to show third-party developers what can be done with Pro software on iPad. And I would like to see the company lead by example here and release this year at least one of their Pro apps on iPad. So what I'm thinking of, I mean, the obvious one is Xcode, right? There's WWDC coming up, and I think it would be fantastic to show off a version of Xcode that runs on iPad Pro, that supports the pointer, that supports Swift, and that allows you to create applications directly on iPad. But I could also go with Final Cut. You know, I could go with Logic, although it doesn't exactly inspire confidence that Apple still makes a Logic remote companion utility for iPad.
Right.
And my wild card would be a new take on iBooks Author that is modern. And of course, it's not even called iBooks anymore. It's called Books.
Right.
But a new book authoring app by Apple that offers more controls and features than what is currently supported in Pages. A book authoring app is my wild dream for the kind of product that I would love to have on iPad, because I can see myself using that a lot for my long form stories.
You're giving someone a lot of work, because on the Mac it's pretty long in the tooth too. So I would hope that they would also update it there, because I used it recently for something for the club, and it was like stepping back in time a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, Federico. Well, I think that's a really good discussion. That's a good episode. Good, solid, long episode.
A chunky episode this week.
It is definitely chunky. We'll be back next week with another episode. We're going to do some more of these, as we said at the top of the show. So, look out for those. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net writing, and you can find Federico on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.